All right, Baruch Mavayim. Welcome to the Asara class. I'm hungry, and so is Israel, and so are all the Jews around the world. But you know what? We're even hungrier for Mashiach, and that's why we're here. So, I don't have my nifty side camera thing. So if you just want to keep your camera off, if you don't, whatever you want to do, that's all good. Yeah, let me do that. Cool. Okay. So today I just want to talk about the fast day, what that has to do with Noachides, like what's the message of the fast day. But I really just wanted to focus on one thing because there's a lot of different things, things that even happened on the 8th of Tevis and the 9th and the 10th. So the Rabbanim just said, let's put all these different things together in one fast day because they are related. But I just want to talk about one part of it. And this I find to be especially relevant to Noachides, converts, of course, but Noachides especially. And that is the commissioning of the um, translation of the Torah into Greek, which is called the Septuagint. And the reason it's called the Septuagint is because I believe it's the Greek Emperor Ptolemy. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, who commissioned the creation of the Septuagint. Now, the thing is, he just wanted to like pull a fast one, right? Like he just wanted to see if he could catch the Jews on like this thing, like there's no way, they're gonna make a mistake or whatever. So the story goes that he commissions the writing of the Septuagint by hiring 70 different rabbis, and that's why it's called Septuagint. If you know any Latin or you know Latin languages, you know like anything with that prefix, that means like 7 or 70. So Septuagint, 70 rabbis, and he puts them all in different rooms, right? And he says, "All right, like translate the Torah into Greek." And there's deeper vorts on that, like why did they start the Septuagint out like that with the word they used, and why does the Torah begin with a bet and not an aleph? That's a whole other thing. But the kind of important part is the kind of the broader idea of translating into another language, translating the Torah into another language. So let me just finish the the summary, so the synopsis. So they get all into these different rooms, right? And then I don't know, like he says go, and so they start going, and they turns out they all like come up with the same exact translation, right? I mean that, and for us, like we kind of take that for granted, in the Jewish world. We're like, oh yeah, the it's Masara, like the rabbis know what to say. I mean, it is just what it is, right? But for the Greeks, this was like a huge this was like a huge miracle, and but not it wasn't like a good thing for them because for them it kind of foiled their whole thing. Like they were trying to catch the Jews off guard, and they were trying to see if they can like find a way to mess them up, right? And they're like, no, no way, no, you can't mess with this. Like we have like divine authority to translate. You can't top that. So there's also a joke, right? That's not a miracle. It's not a miracle that 70 different rabbis in different rooms came up with the same translation. The miracle would be if they were all in the same room and they came up with the same translation. That would be the miracle. So there you go. There's your Jewish joke for the week. So what's the Vart? Like what is the what's the little business? And it's just to focus on the idea that a translation is a interpretation. And this is another thing we kind of take for granted in the Jewish world because we use the Targum Onkelos, the Targum Yonasan because they interpret it, right? And they say things in a way that help us understand what the original Hebrew says. But the way we use it is specifically as a commentary, like as an interpretation. And we know that like lechatchila, like ahead of time. But that's not the case from where we come from, right? Like where the non-Jews come from, because where we're from, we have the King James version or whatever. We have this version and the new international backwards version or like the upside down version. Or like, they just keep coming up with stuff and they're like, oh no, this this is the real one, this is the one Yashki said, whatever they have, right. That's not my field, but they're all wrong because they're all wrong because they have things that are against the Torah in them, right? And they change things. Besides the point. But the point is that why is it a fast? Like you would think it's such a huge miracle that they were able to come up with the same exact translation and doesn't that like speak volumes to the authority of the Rabbanim, and doesn't that speak volumes to the divine authority of the Torah, and like how else could they? Yeah, true, and like we gotta like acknowledge that. But what is so wrong about it? What was wrong about it is if it wasn't for this thing, this Septuagint, we wouldn't have the King James version, right? Like we wouldn't have Greek scriptures like in order to be maimed and mangled with. Like if it was still in its original Hebrew, you would have to know the original Hebrew. You would have to know how to read it. And if you wanted to know how to read it, you have to be taught by like a rabbi, because even if you could read the Hebrew letters, there is no way to interpret it. There's no way because the Hebrew is biblical, right? And it's not, sometimes it uses poetic language to illustrate a point, and you have to know why. Like, and that's why it's so important to study with commentary and with like the Targum that I mentioned just now. That's why we include that in our daily study, because you can't just like read even if you knew Hebrew, you can't just read the Hebrew and expect to like understand the point or the main idea or the takeaway, right? So this basically undermined, instead of it like speaking volumes to the authority of the Torah, it really ended up undermining the authority of the Torah because it gave the nations of the world what to play with. Like they gave them what to work with, and that caused so many problems for the Jewish people, right? And I mean, any history majors in the house, any history buffs will know that after the advent of Christianity, I mean, things just got exponentially worse for the Jewish people. Like there was nothing good that ever came of that. I mean, it's only in recent times, and by recent I mean like maybe 100 years, right? Maybe that they're nice now. Okay, gewaltig. They're nice. Okay, great. Like, I mean, appreciate it. Like, thanks. Thanks for not starting a pogrom, right? But um, that's like recent and like historically that was yesterday. So it's like, okay, fine, but like this Gallus is different. Okay, fine. Um, so as a Noahide, you should really be cognizant of this because you're not expected to know Hebrew. Um, no human being expects you to know Hebrew, and of course, like Hashem is not going to like expect that of you. But if you're interested in learning about Torah and about Judaism, about mitzvahs, even just the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, this is something you should be cognizant of. And I wanted to bring this and just to talk about the importance of studying Torah in the right way. And I'm gonna be right back, and I'm gonna get a book that I want to recommend to you, or a chumash that I want to recommend to you. Give me 2 seconds. This guy. So it's from Art Scroll. It's called the Saperstein edition of the Rashi. Rashi's commentary on the Chumash. And I'm going to open up just random page. And if you see here, let me try to get it in a frame. If you can see here, that's one verse, okay? That's one verse of the Torah, and that's the commentary. That's the commentary. That's what you need, okay? Like maybe it's a little overkill for Vinoch, but like I mean it's MS, like it's true, right? There's like nothing like wrong with like reading this, you know. We'll get, I mean, I think maybe a different separate class about like what is appropriate, but for sure, like Torah, the five books of Moses, for sure, like you get into that, you know. But the benefit of doing stuff like this and getting a thick old honking thing, which is like five different volumes, like one for each book of the Torah, and it has like these crazy like, and I don't know if you can see, but like it breaks down the Rashi like literally word for word. It gives you sources, and on the bottom there's like footnotes to the footnotes. You know, anyone ever watch Pit My Ride? You know, like exhibits like, hey man, we heard you like footnotes, so we put your footnotes on the footnotes. So your footnotes got footnotes, you know, like that. Like it's crazy. And you just spend hours on the same pasuk. That's why like there's this one little thing and then crazy. That gets thrown out the window with the Septuagint. Okay, that gets thrown out the window, and because of that, the Septuagint is like the Christians' weapon of mass destruction because this is where they get off and say like, doesn't it say in the Torah that there was this, or doesn't it say in the Navi and the prophets say this about Yashki in Isaiah 53 and blah blah blah. And side note, it's another thing. Nowadays we have a Septuagint that includes the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the writings of the prophets, but that wasn't the case. The thing that happened that we're fasting for, or one of the things we're fasting for, um, was only the five books of Moses, right? So if you ever hear, because I've heard this before, if you ever hear a Christian bring an argument or say something like, well, you know, it says in the Septuagint and like Isaiah or like Ezekiel, like and they bring like a prophet, you know, they're full of hot air because there was no, they didn't translate that. That wasn't part of the Septuagint. Problem is, the original Septuagint was lost, I believe, in the fire, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, if I'm not mistaken. Fact check me, please. So we don't have that. Like that's like gone. So like the original one we don't have. It was only when the Christians were like, oh, we need to like translate the we need to translate the sorry, excuse me, the Tanakh, the whole thing into Greek so we can like make up a religion and murder Jews and stuff. So they did that. And you'll notice if you ever go to like a bookstore, a Goyish bookstore, obviously, you go to a bookstore, and you get a Septuagint or you order one online or whatever, usually, if it's an honest publication, they'll put in the very beginning, like this is not the original Septuagint. This is this is a newer version. And that newer version was translated by Christians. So anything that Christians will say about the Septuagint, I would bet money they're talking about the new version. And you can tell if they bring a Navi. Like if they bring the Chumash, like it can go either way. Like maybe they know what they're talking about because there are biblical scholars that they know what they're talking about, and their beliefs are like what they are, and that's another thing. It's kind of their business, but whatever. But we don't have access to that to begin with. Like there's no way to like reference the original Septuagint, right? So like how are you gonna, right? Doesn't make sense. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to everyone. I just like went through a lot of different things. Any quite Yeah, Vilma, go ahead. Sorry.
So, thank you. This is the first time I've listened to your courses about Noahide, and so it's very elucidating. I always wondered what the Old Testament in the Christian Bible was based on, because did they really translate it from, and it just seems very abbreviated. So, what you're saying is that what did they actually do with that Old Testament? They based it on on what, something that doesn't exist, or how did that happen?
So they have, I mean, there are Christian Bible scholars who know Hebrew, right? So it's well within their wheelhouse to create another translation. And that is, to my understanding, the way I've learned this, like that's what happened is because there was no original Septuagint, they were kind of like in a situation. Like they need something that people can actually read, right? Regular people, not Jewish people, because obviously Jewish kids, little kiddelech, like around here in Chabad, like they're just going around screaming Torah Siva Lanu Moshe, like they know Pasukim, like they not talking about them. We're talking about like non-Jewish people getting into scripture, like that's what they really want to do. The problem is now they can interpolate their own theologies into it, right? And this is not only with the Greek Septuagint, but also with the Latin versions and the English versions and all the other translations that were made by Christians. And we should also remember that the very first book to be printed on a printing press was a Gutenberg Bible, which is a Christian Bible. So there you go. Like they just had a leg up on us, on in that front. And because it was in a common language, right? Like what we would consider English today was Greek in the ancient world, right? Um, so like in the times of Yashki, they either spoke in Israel in Eretz Israel, they either spoke Aramaic or Greek, and then Hebrew was like for study for Torah and stuff like that. You find the same kind of thing in the Hasidic communities in New York, in Europe, right? Like they speak Yiddish 90% of the time, but that I mean that's not like a it's not like Lashon Kodesh or anything. It's like Yiddish. And if you know any Yiddish, it's literally just like English and German with Hebrew letters, and then like a little Hebrew like flavor, like a hint of Hebrew, right? So it's a vernacular. It is a vernacular language. Not saying you shouldn't learn it, but it's vernacular. It's what it is. Call a spade a spade. And so that's basically what the Greek was. So it's very, very important for Christians to get the inaccessible Hebrew into something that's more accessible. But then, like, very first thing I said in the whole video was that every translation is an interpretation. So if you already believe that Yashki is this guy and like this all and that, like you believe that, obviously you're gonna put that into your translation. Like that's what you do. And it's like as a human being, it's like impossible to escape your bias, right? Um, Another reason why it's important to rely on Masorah or a tradition. And if you look on the side of almost every art scroll, it'll say you can't see it because the camera is not great. It says art scroll Masorah. Now that's just what they call it, but they're using that language, that word for a reason, because that's basically like a hechsher, basically a hechsher. Um, and books do have hechshers, Noachides don't have to keep kosher. You can eat as many ham and cheese sandwiches as you want. Have a great time. I don't miss them. But for books, they're called haskamas, and they're in the front. They're basically like pictures for books, and you can see like this Rav, that Rav said this, and oh, this book can be better. Like they just go on and like flatter the author and stuff. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I didn't have time to read this, but hey, like anything this guy says is MS, you know. Like I've read those too. Um, but yeah, very, very important for Noachides, especially because like Jews have this at their fingertips, but Noachides, like you, I'm sure you've gone on Google, right? You Google this question, you have a question, and then like the first two pages of Google are like Christian nonsense, right? And you're like, that's not what I want. So life hack, just type in your question in the Google and then put Chabad and then press enter, and then you get something kosher. Um, you don't have to be Chabad like associated with Chabad, but the fact of the matter is Chabad.org is the most accessible, easy to use, user-friendly repository of Jewish knowledge and wisdom. And you can find anything, and they have Rambam.
So it was only because I was introduced to Chabad that I understood that they had such a accessible library of everything
Yeah.
online. And so, and then later on, someone on Joe Rogan spoke about it because nobody knows what it is, what that word means, Chabad. So he was like, oh, it's a very good website. It has everything in there. It's like a learning website for Jewish people. And so it was funny when I heard that because you could look at it that way, and it does have a lot of source material, whereas other places I don't really trust, I don't really know. So whenever I look up terms, I always type Chabad. And like before you even said that, because I'm an English major political science scholar, I know that sources matter,
Hmm.
and that who translates what. And because I know multiple languages, of course it can be mistranslated, of course things can not exist in a language but exist in another.
Right.
And so I'm very well aware and cognizant, and also I write a lot. I want to be knowing exactly what I'm talking about from direct sources. So I've bought so many books, you don't understand. I can't even like open a box and like read it all. But I do look at direct sources, and I do go to New York because that's where the publishers are. The
Hmm.
Art Scroll I was introduced to, but there's Key Hot Publications. Like there's so much out there as
Yeah.
far as books because I prefer books. However, the online resources that are on the Chabad website are the best just to look up stuff really quickly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's where I got my start as well. Um, I do want to tell a quick anecdote on that, but because it's kind of unrelated, does anyone else have questions, or Vilma, do you have more questions before I tell a story?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so when I was in college, I learned about this concept of the Pardes, like the story. And the way I heard it, I thought it was like a joke, right? So the rabbi was telling me this, started out by saying like, oh, so like one time like four rabbis walk into an orchard, and I'm like, okay, great, another rabbi joke, right? And it's like, no, like this is this is how it goes. So like, if you have never heard this, it's very mystical. Don't recommend diving too deep in it. It's probably go crazy, which is part of the story, right? So like, four rabbis walk into an orchard. One of them goes crazy, one of them dies, one of them becomes a heretic, and Rabbi Akiva just comes out unscathed. Now that the explanation of that is not for here at all, but I will say that it eluded me. This whole thing just eluded me, and the rabbi didn't really go further with that. Um, right? So I was just like, it was keep literally like keeping me up at night. I was like, what does this mean, right? And I had the same experience of Vilma as you, right? Like I Googled it, and it's just like all this crazy woo-wee stuff, like new agey stuff, like uh numbers, crystals, blah blah blah, that kind of weird stuff, right? And of course the Christian stuff peppered in there too. But I was like, what is this, right? Because I know the rabbi is talking about something from like the tradition, right? So I want that. Like I really want that. And so I kept looking, 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 looking. and then I stumbled upon Chabad.org, and it was using like Hebrew words and like explaining things in such a like crazy way. And I was like, I don't know like what this is, but this is so real, so true. And it was. And I went to the rabbi the next day or maybe the day after, and I was like, hey, like I was looking up this stuff on like this website called Chabad. Like, is that a good website? He's like, oh yeah, like like whatever they say, like you just that's a good, like a great website, it's perfect, blah blah blah. I was like, okay, fine. So I just dove head first into it, and that basically like ignited my whole Jewish journey. I mean, that was like 2019 maybe, so 2018, 2019 maybe. Yeah. So it was a few years ago already, but yeah, like I still remember it like it was just yesterday. Crazy, crazy experience. Um, but yeah, I it was so clear. It was like so self-evident. Like no one needed to like really tell me that you have to like find kosher sources. And if that's just for, an agada, like in Gemara and like Jewish law, the Codex of Jewish law, there's law, less halacha, and then there's agada, which is like stories like this that you don't necessarily have to like take literally, because if you take it literally, you're kind of missing the point. Like it's coming to teach you something, right? So the literal meaning is not like so important. I hope I'm explaining that right, correctly. Um, but yeah, that was pretty much where I got my start. And so if that's the case for the Agada, right, all the more so with the Torah, like all the more so, you must get kosher text, kosher translations. Art Scroll, beautiful, because they have so many different options. You don't have to get this big old honkin' 5 volume set. Like you can get a modest one thing like this big. You get the whole Tanakh, and just it's a great translation. You get it side by side. So if you do want to learn Hebrew, I can refer you to a Hebrew teacher if you'd like. The woman who taught me Hebrew, you can find her on Instagram. Very, very good. Nice Israeli accent. So that's what you want. I can hook you up. But yeah, like if you want to understand like the place of a Noahide in this world, it's imperative to study Torah. Imperative, especially the book of Genesis or Breshit, because there were no Jews in the entire Sefer Bereshit. Like there, not one Jew existed. Why? Because the nation of Israel was founded at Mount Sinai, and that the in Sinai revelation takes place in the next book, right? So what we learned last class, we were talking about sexual immorality, in the context of Yosef and Esha Potiphar. That has nothing to do with, I don't want to say nothing to do with Jewish law, but the way Rashi explains it is it's specifically like a Noahide issue, and that's what Yosef was trying to say, right? So yeah, it's very, very important to do that, and I guess that's like all I wanted to talk about. Anyone have any questions? Can someone have a question?
I have a lot of questions. I'm just like, no, I've heard the story of the parties. It's a mystical thing. And in my experience, you need to come in with the right intent and heart to be peaceful, to learn, like, and delve into not just the superficial, but the mystical aspect. And that's why people want you to be like a certain age to have
Mm,
experience a bit. Yeah, and I met a kid named Akiva, and I mean, it's really beautiful to actually experience what is said with the people and to put it all in context, because it is a story, it is a trajectory, it is a movement from the beginning to the end of creation, and that's all God. And so for me, whenever I read, and I've bought books of the Humash or anything that I've written, I go to the source, and anywhere that I go, I look at the books. And it's just awesome that there are so many. but I do trust those publications and the ones that I've seen at certain places like the Schultz.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
if
yeah,
you have access to a shul, like that's too easy because like you'll just look on their bookshelf, whatever they have, get that.
yeah.
Like
Hmm.
too easy, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I don't know how anybody could do it without actually being part of a community because it's a lot.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. With Noahides, it's like kind of tough because we still want to be respectful of like issues of assimilation, right? And even though Noahides, by definition, keep the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, and they're not interested in being Jewish, and they're not interested in assimilating or marrying a Jew or anything like that, it's still like you can't just play favorites, you know, like there has to be one rule and everyone follows that. And it just applies to everyone equally, right? Now in Gaulis, right, in exile, there is no such thing. I think I talked about this in one of the first shirim. There's no such thing as this ger toshav, this concept that is talked about in halacha of a ger toshav means resident alien, right? And it's a non-Jew who keeps the Sheva Mitzvah b'nei Noach, but lives amongst the Jewish people. The problem with that is that can only be realized, or like that can only be like you can only a person can only fit in that category if the Jubilee year is being observed. And the Jubilee year can only be observed when there's a Sanhedrin and the temple and, you know, Mashiach and everything, right? So the next time we're going to have that is when Mashiach comes. So now there's no such thing. I don't care how righteous you are. You can be like the Noach of the generation. I don't care. Like, and you know, the halacha doesn't care either. Like, it's not about that. It's not about like, you know, it's not a personal thing. That's just the way it is. It's just like that. So, living in a community, being a part of the community, it can be weird, right? But you just have to be very like friendly or respectful with the rabbi, make friends with the rabbi, the leaders of the community. Once the leaders of the community know you and trust you, then you can start to like feel around, um, get, you know, dip your toes in the water, see like what the vibe is, so to speak. And then go from there because chances are they'll let you like come to stuff, right? Like if they know you're not a missionary or anything, like chances are they'll be cool with you. But you have to like break that ice first, right? That'd be the best like ideal thing. But like if you can't do that, if you're just at home, right? Um, buy an art scroll Tanakh, art scroll Torah, Chumash. Get a set. They have so many different options, different sizes, different versions, right? But they're those are all kosher, for sure. Any other questions? I got like 4 minutes on the Zoom here, so like hit them up, hit up the questions. I will. Ah, honey, shkoyach. Have good luck cooking while on an empty stomach. Kol hakavod. I would know. Wow. All right. Kol hakavod. Good Shabbos. Um, yeah. So just I guess a few closing remarks to Sarah Batavid. We're fasting because this was actually such um, a crazy thing. It changed the Jewish world forever because now the nations of the world have access to our sacred literature, right? And I mean that's always something that I wondered about coming up and studying. I was like, how do they do that? Like, how do you read the Torah and like come up with that? Like, it doesn't say that. Like you know, like there's no capital letters in Hebrew or in Greek for that matter. I mean, in ancient Greek at least, right? So you read the English and it's like Son of Man, capital S, capital M. Like what? Like who who did that? Like that who does that? No one talks like that, right? So yeah, that's why it's so important, and especially the no hide, so you get the right information And when you do, if you do get one of these Tanakhs, one of these Chumashim, I'll challenge you. Go into your old Avodah Zarah Dika, Svarim, and look and see how they maim and mangle the scripture. They literally like change things, right? And I always wonder, like, how do you do that? How do you get away with that? Like this, you translate the Torah into Greek and leave out all the context. Like you get rid of the commentary, you get rid of all the stuff. I also forgot to mention that Hebrew as a language is not by consensus, right? So I'm sure many of you have heard this, like, but the right in English we call a table because just throughout history we decided that that's what it's going to be called, right? And we call a chair for the same reason. But if tomorrow we all woke up and we're like, like I'm feeling funny today, let's call a table a chair and vice versa, then that would be the case, right? But in Hebrew, the I'm sure I said this before, so sorry if this is a repeat, but the word for table is shulchan in Hebrew, and we learn that the energetic value, if you will, of the word shulchan is what brings tables into existence. When Hashem created the world, he created the world through his speech. So everything has like a word for it. And it's like that, if you know programming, you type in stuff into your terminal and you create an app and then you run it. And based on the text, it runs the app, right? So in a similar way, like Hashem looked into the Torah, as we're told in our tradition, like he looked into the Torah and then created the world. What does that mean? Like he basically wrote the program, wrote the code, clicked run, the world was created. So everything, the table, chairs, everything, dogs, cats, people, everything, what it is that, and it can never ever be changed. So that's it. I got less than a minute, and Daily Tanya is coming up. So stay tuned for that with Rabbi Yeye. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we should all have an easy fast for those who are fasting, and have an easy, meaningful feast for all those who are not observing. Shkoyach, everybody, and good Shabbos.